The coffee shop smelled like burnt sugar and early rain. I had my usual corner table, the one by the window where the sunlight hit just right, but I didn't care much about the light. I mostly cared about the quiet. I hadn't planned to notice her, though I probably had seen her before. Maybe twice. Maybe a dozen times. She was always there in the mid-morning lull, with a paperback tucked under her arm and a thermos that looked too heavy for her hands. She ordered a black coffee today. I noticed because she said, "Just black, thank you," and her voice had this calm certainty that made me hesitate over my own order. I had ordered the same thing 3 times that week without even thinking, and suddenly it felt trivial, like I'd been running in circles while she had mapped the streets. I folded my napkin twice, neatly, then unfolded it once and tucked it back in the pocket. My eyes flicked toward her hands, how her fingers curled around the cup, how the ring on her left hand caught the light for a moment. She glanced up, maybe noticing me noticing, maybe not, and smiled in a way that wasn't a smile at all, more like a pause in the middle of a sentence. I wanted to talk. I didn't. Instead, I waited for her to find a seat, the one 2 tables down from mine. She didn't, just leaned against the counter for a moment, scanning something on her phone, then walked past me and out the door. The bell chimed behind her. The scent of coffee lingered, but she left it behind in the sunlight. I picked up my phone, scrolled past the unsent texts I had typed to friends who never replied, to my own notes to myself that went nowhere. Loneliness wasn't a roar, it was the tiny gaps between things, the chairs she didn't sit in, the half-empty sugar packet I didn't use, the way the clock ticked loud in the quiet I had made for myself. She returned 5 minutes later, with a muffin this time, and hummed something under her breath. I caught it, barely, a fragment of melody that didn't belong to anything. She sat across from someone I couldn't see, then looked up, just briefly, and caught my gaze. Not a stare, nothing that heavy. Just an acknowledgement. My chest tightened in that quiet, sharp way it did when something small and unexpected cut through routine. I wanted to say, "Hey, I've seen you here before," but instead I pretended to type on my phone. Pretending to type is a safe thing, a small way to exist without needing to explain why my throat felt tight or why my hands itched to reach for something that wasn't mine. Then she left again, and as she passed, her bag brushed mine. I felt the faintest tug, almost imaginary. I opened my phone, a message, from a number I didn't recognize. "Coffee tomorrow? I think you left your jacket at my table." I stared at it too long. My thumb hovered over reply. The napkin I had folded earlier now lay crumpled in my palm. Steady. Certain. She had no idea how badly I wanted to ask, how unsure I usually was. And yet, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid that I ran into her again at the little bookstore around the corner. She was leaning over a display of notebooks, tracing the edges with one finger as if deciding which one deserved her attention. I wanted to say something clever, or at least noticeable, but all I managed was a quiet, "Hey." She looked up, a flash of recognition, and smiled, not the same smile as the coffee shop, something softer, like she remembered a song she hadn't thought about in years. "Hey," she said back, tilting her head. Her hair had fallen loose today, a few strands brushing her cheeks. We wandered the aisle side by side, silently. I wanted to ask why she always came here alone. I didn't. Instead, I let my eyes follow the way her fingers hovered over the spines of books, how her brow furrowed at a title she didn't recognize. At some point, she glanced at me and laughed quietly, almost to herself. "Do you ever, reread a book you hated as a kid?" she asked suddenly, holding a thin volume of poetry. "Just to see if it makes sense now?" I shrugged. "I guess. Maybe. Depends on the book." She nodded, tucking the book under her arm. "I did that yesterday. Found this old poetry book I hated in high school. Turned out some lines weren't so bad." She hesitated, then added, "I guess it's funny how we change and nothing else does." I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. Her honesty hit differently because it was quiet, almost casual, but weighted with something I couldn't name. Maybe life. Maybe regret. Maybe a sense of being halfway through, still figuring out which pieces of ourselves were ours to keep. We ended up in the cafe next door, sitting across from each other with steaming tea. She stirred her cup slowly, her spoon catching the light. I watched it spin, felt the tug of wanting to reach over, straighten the edge of the cup, close that small gap between us. "You're steady," I said finally, unsure why I said it, almost like a question. She blinked. "Huh? You're steady," I tried again, gesturing vaguely at her hands, her posture, the way she seemed unshaken by things that usually shook me. "When everything else feels, I don't know, messy." Her smile softened, a little wistful. "That's kind of sad to hear," she said, brushing her hair back with one hand. Then, quieter, almost to herself, "Maybe that's why you notice it." There was a pause. A long one. We didn't fill it. I didn't want to. When she left, she touched my shoulder lightly, nothing deliberate, nothing heavy. Just a brush. But it lingered on my skin, on my mind. I watched her walk away, tucked her scarf around her neck, and thought about the small, improbable connection between two strangers who weren't strangers at all anymore. I don't know why that moment stayed with me, maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. That it was raining that afternoon, thin sheets sliding down the cafe windows. I'd planned to stop by for a quick coffee, the one thing that didn't feel rushed in my day. She was already there, notebook open, pen poised but still. I hesitated at the door, watching her glance up, then down, like she hadn't noticed me yet. When she did, her smile was smaller than usual, tight at the edges. "Hey," she said, folding her hands over her cup. I could tell something had shifted, though I had no idea what. I slid into the seat opposite her. The steam from our drinks curled between us. I wanted to lean in, wanted to ask about her day, wanted to, something. But she folded her arms slightly, a subtle barricade. "Busy morning," she said instead, tapping the notebook with her pen. I nodded, letting silence settle over the table. I noticed how her fingers drummed lightly against the cup, impatient. Nervous? She kept glancing at the door, as if expecting someone, though no one came. "I think," she started, then stopped. Shook her head. Looked away. "Never mind." The words hung there, unfinished, and I felt the pull, the risk of asking too much, the risk of asking too little. I wanted to bridge the gap, to touch that hesitation, but didn't. Instead, I reached for my own cup, fingers brushing the rim. A friend of hers walked in, mid-30s, easy smile, someone who knew her well. She stiffened, offered a quick nod, and the spell broke. The air between us was different now, public, watched. I felt the distance creep in, subtle but unmistakable. We moved to another table when the friend left, and I caught her hand briefly as we passed. She didn't pull away, but her eyes flicked up, searching mine, asking something I couldn't answer. We sat across from each other, quiet, and I realized I didn't know if she wanted me there or if she was testing me. I imagined leaning in, just a little, and kissing her, soft, careful, nothing rushed. She shifted slightly, and my heart jumped. Her lips, the warmth of her hand, the way her scarf fell across her shoulder, it was all too close. Too dangerous. I stopped myself. She didn't. She looked down, then back up, and for a fraction of a second, our eyes held. No words. No confession. Just the weight of possibility. The rain outside intensified. A car passed, headlights blurring against the wet glass. I realized my hands were resting too close to hers on the table. She noticed. She didn't move them, but didn't move them closer either. I wanted to ask something, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I just breathed, quiet, deliberate, feeling the almost, the could be, the risk. She gave me a fleeting smile, uncertain, careful, and I knew that nothing had changed and everything had changed, all at once. I left the cafe later, the memory of her hand still on mine. Almost a touch, almost a confession, almost a line crossed. And for the first time, I wondered if almost might be enough that I found her on the bench near the small park behind her apartment. The sun had dropped low, casting long shadows across the path, turning everything gold and quiet. I thought I'd only stay a minute, maybe say something small about the coffee shop, but she was already there, looking down at her hands folded in her lap. "You're late," she said, softly, not looking up. "I got caught up," I mumbled, shifting my weight from one foot to the other. The bench creaked under me as I sat. We didn't speak for a moment. The only sound was a distant dog barking and the faint shuffle of leaves in the wind. She finally glanced at me. "You've been quiet," she said, and I realized how little she knew of me, the small routines, the texts I never sent, the half-finished thoughts I carried around. I don't know what to say," I admitted, voice low. My thumb traced the edge of the bench, finding the rough splinter, almost wanting to leave a mark. She nodded, slow, deliberate. "Sometimes I feel like there's too much you're not telling me," she said. Her words weren't angry, just steady, exposed. I swallowed. The truth was heavier than I thought. "I imagine things," I said finally, almost a whisper. "Small, stupid things. About you. About us. And then I think, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe it's not my place." Her lips parted slightly. She let out a quiet sigh, then looked away. "I think about things too," she admitted, almost under her breath. "Things I shouldn't." I felt the air thicken. Her voice had a tremor I hadn't heard before. A vulnerability that was sudden, unpracticed. I wanted to reach for her hand, but stopped myself. Instead, I leaned back, letting the silence stretch between us like a bridge. "I worry," she said, after a pause. "I worry I'm complicating your life. That you're too young for whatever this is." "You're not," I said quickly, but immediately doubted it. Too young. Too old. Too many reasons to stop. And yet, the way she said it, quietly, without shame, like a confession, made my chest ache. We sat there, both breathing in the small, ordinary sound of the park. I watched her fingers, tapping lightly against her knee. I wanted to tell her everything, to strip it all bare, but I didn't know if I could. Instead, I asked a question I didn't know how to finish. "Do you ever wonder if we're?" She looked up at me then, eyes wide, and didn't answer. Just the pause. Just that wait. Just the almost. The wind shifted. A leaf fluttered down between us, landing on her lap. I wanted to move it, wanted to do something, anything, to keep this moment from ending. And then the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a thin line of light over the city. She tucked her hair behind her ear, glanced at me, and in that quiet, unspoken way, everything felt like it could tip. If only one of us dared. The cafe felt emptier than usual when I walked in. My usual table by the window was occupied, but that didn't matter. She wasn't here. I ordered my coffee, the barista's voice distant, background noise swallowing the familiar warmth. I kept checking my phone, no message, no hint, no breadcrumb. The notebook she liked wasn't tucked under her arm. The thermos she carried like a weight she barely noticed wasn't on the counter. I tried calling her once, twice. Nothing. Not even voicemail. I sat there stirring my coffee, watching the steam curl like it was trying to tell me something I couldn't understand. She showed up 3 days later. Hair pulled back this time, expression unreadable. She didn't greet me immediately, just moved past the tables as if she'd forgotten someone might be expecting her. I froze mid-step, unsure if I should wave, call her name, sit down and wait. When she finally noticed me, it was with a nod, a small, polite tilt of the head. No smile. The certainty she'd carried before had softened, maybe cracked. I realized then that something had changed, though I didn't know what. "I had a lot going on," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Her voice was careful, measured. "Things I didn't want to drag into our coffee." I nodded, slow, watching her eyes flick away from mine. I wanted to ask, but the words stumbled in my throat. Instead, I just stirred my drink, the clink of the spoon loud in the quiet space between us. I thought about the mornings we'd spent together, the small confessions, the almost touches, and wondered what had shifted. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was the life she carried outside this bubble, a divorce, a child she rarely mentioned, an ex who lingered in old photos. She hadn't said anything. But absence, the kind that wasn't explained, carried a weight heavier than words. I imagined scenarios, things I shouldn't, and felt that familiar tug in my chest. Hope. Confusion. Withdrawal. A tiny twist of panic when she glanced down at her phone mid-conversation, maybe waiting for someone else. The coffee cooled faster than usual. I left a few bills on the table, fingers brushing her hand briefly, just a fraction, almost imperceptible. She didn't react. I didn't ask for a reaction. When I stepped outside, the street was wet from a light rain, and the city hummed quietly around me. I thought about sending a message, but didn't. I pictured her opening it, reading it, deciding something I couldn't control. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence I'd been waiting for. I walked past the bench we'd sat on last week, empty now. My hand hovered over the cold metal for a second, then fell away. The door I hadn't knocked on still waited. The chair she hadn't taken remained vacant. And for a while, the world moved around me, slow and incomplete, as if holding its breath for something neither of us could name. That I found her at her apartment doorway, keys in hand, ready to leave. I'd been walking past the block for 20 minutes, circling like I always did when I couldn't decide what to say. She looked at me, and for the first time in days, I didn't see hesitation. I saw fatigue. Quiet, real, human fatigue. "You came," she said, almost a statement, almost a question. Yeah, I said, voice low. I wanted to take a step forward but held myself. Something about the line of her jaw, the tilt of her head, made me pause. She didn't move. The door remained open behind her, a little gap of light against the dim hallway. I noticed the faint smell of tea, the leftover warmth from a cup she must have set down minutes ago. Ordinary things, and yet all of them felt like markers in this long pause between us. I didn't mean to pull away, she admitted, looking down at her shoes. Things got complicated. I nodded, unsure how to respond. Complicated was the word she used for everything I was too afraid to name. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I stayed still. Instead, I let my thumb brush against my own jacket pocket, tracing the seam, a quiet grounding gesture. "I thought maybe you'd decide I wasn't worth the risk," she continued, quiet, careful. "Or that I'd scare you off." I swallowed, heart tight. I don't want to not be here. Even if it's complicated." The words came out halting, unsure, but they were true. Her eyes met mine then, longer than they had in days. Not a look of demand, or expectation, just acknowledgement, two people holding a space together that neither wanted to leave. She exhaled, slow, and I noticed her fingers flexing at her sides. Small movements, but they carried everything she hadn't said. I stepped closer, careful, measuring. Not to invade, but to reach. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay," I echoed, almost instinctively. I didn't ask for permission. She didn't offer it. The word was enough, a bridge we could both step onto, or retreat from, without needing to define it further. I brushed my hand against hers, light, tentative. She didn't pull away. Not fully. Not yet. Just a gentle, almost imperceptible leaning into the moment. We stood there for a minute, door open behind her, rain faint on the sidewalk, city murmuring around us. No grand declarations. No poetry. Just acknowledgement. Two people showing up, quiet, real, tentative, willing to exist in the same space without pretense. And that was enough. A soft smile, barely there. A breath that felt like surrender without giving anything away. And in that small, ordinary way, the tension shifted. The waiting ended, even if only a little, because we'd both chosen, and sometimes, that's all that matters. That it was 8:47 a.m. when I finally saw her again at the little bench in the park, the same one where we had almost crossed that line a few weeks ago. The air was crisp, early sunlight threading through bare branches. She had her thermos, black coffee this time, and a thin scarf wrapped around her neck. I carried my own cup, still warm, my hands snug around it. She looked up, noticed me, and there was that small, familiar smile, the one that made ordinary mornings feel a little extraordinary. No words were necessary. We both knew why we were there, why we came back to this simple routine, and why the small gestures mattered more than anything grand. "Morning," I said, voice low, steady. "Morning," she replied. She poured a little of her coffee into the small paper cup beside her, then pushed it toward me. I accepted it, careful not to spill, careful to let the silence do its work. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. Just the gentle clink of spoons and mugs, the distant murmur of the city waking up. Every so often, our eyes met, a fleeting acknowledgement, an echo of all the almost moments we'd shared. At one point, she stirred her tea, the spoon catching the light, and I remembered the first cafe afternoon, her hands moving the same way. I caught myself smiling, quietly, because it felt like a thread connecting then to now, the slow weaving of familiarity and trust. She laughed softly at something, too quiet for anyone else to hear, and I felt my chest ease. The tension, the hesitation, the waiting, all seemed distant, like a shadow we'd left behind on a different bench, on a different day. I reached over, lightly brushing her hand as I set down my cup. She didn't pull away. Just a faint squeeze, an acknowledgement that wasn't spoken, and in that simple act, the quiet certainty settled in. We stayed like that for a while, two people sharing warmth, tea, black coffee, the occasional shared glance, the odd remark about a passing dog, a leaf drifting in the wind. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours, grounded, steady, earned. When she finally stood to leave, she tucked her scarf under her coat, paused, and looked at me. No dramatic flourish. No declaration. Just a smile, soft and knowing. I watched her walk away, then took a sip from my cup. The bitter warmth lingered. And for a moment, I realized, it wasn't the coffee, the bench, or the morning that mattered. It was the quiet, unspoken understanding we had built together, the way someone could know you completely in the smallest gestures. I glanced at my watch. 9:03 a.m. The world moved on around us, but something inside had settled. Peace, careful and earned, like the slow fold of sunlight across the park. And I thought, quietly, to myself, she'll always be the reason I notice the little things. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?